Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something that's really been stirring things up, causing maybe a bit of friction, around the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
Specifically, the dynamic between their new quarterback, Shedeur Sanders, and, well, some very established figures in the Cleveland sports media.
It's a really interesting setup, isn't it? You've got Shedeur Sanders coming in. I mean, huge profile.
Singular.
His dad's Deion Sanders, right? He won a lot in college. He's got this very specific brand already built up. And the fan excitement, well, you can feel it.
Oh, yeah.
Jersey sales, those training camp videos going viral. It feels like he's bringing a totally new kind of energy to the dog pound.
Absolutely. The fans were, immediately all in. But the perspective we're digging into today, from the source material, it points out that this warm welcome wasn't exactly universal. Especially not from everyone covering the team. It really focuses in on two specific names, longtime voices there, Mary Kay Cabot and Tony Grossi.
That's right. And the analysis we're looking at, it suggests that some of the early stuff from them, it wasn't just your standard media questions. It felt, or at least came across as notably sharp, pretty critical right out of the gate.
Which leads us straight to the big question this material's asking. Why? Why this friction seemingly from day one? Is it just personalities not clicking? Or is there maybe something deeper happening, like the source piece itself kind of hints at with its title?
Yeah, the title asks if the media seems to hate Shedeur Sanders. That's pretty strong language.
It is.
And the piece, well, it isn't necessarily arguing they hate him exactly, but it's trying to explore what's behind this friction, suggesting it's maybe bigger than just a few specific interactions.
Exactly. So our goal here, using the source material as our map, is to sort of unpack the why behind all this. The analysis argues this might not just be about, personal feelings, but maybe reflects these deeper cultural, maybe even generational splits in sports journalism itself.
Right, like this specific case is a really clear example of those forces clashing.
Yeah, the idea that Shedeur and these particular media figures kind of represent different eras, different ways of doing things, and we're seeing that collision play out.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's dig into how the source paints this picture, this perceived culture clash. It really frames Shedeur Sanders as embodying a new generation of athletes. He's described as way more than just a QB, right? He's like a prepackaged brand. Came in with a really savvy social media game, those big NIL deals from college.
Yeah, already established.
And of course, you can't ignore the spotlight that comes with being Deion's son. The material mentions little details like his chain game is strong, his quotes after games are bold, he rarely speaks without intention. He just carries himself with this confidence, this visibility that most rookies, well, they just don't have.
And the source contrasts that pretty sharply, actually, with what it calls a more traditional Cleveland media approach, specifically pointing to the style of Cabot and Grossi.
And that traditional approach, according to this source, tends to expect players, especially the young guys, to sort of earn their stripes, earn their voice over time before they get too vocal or, outwardly confident.
Right, keep your head down for a bit.
Exactly. And from that viewpoint, having all this swagger without proven NFL success can look like arrogance, like you haven't paid your dues yet. And Shedeur, well, the source says he oozes self-assuredness before he's even played a full NFL snap.
So the piece really sets it up as this fundamental mismatch, doesn't it? One side valuing, let's say, an old school demand for humility, and the other representing a new school command of presence right from the jump.
Yeah.
It's not just about can he throw the ball. It's about the style, the presentation, and the expectations around how a young guy, especially a quarterback, should act and talk in public.
And what's really interesting looking at this analysis is that this tension, it apparently wasn't something that just popped up after the draft. The source suggests there were signs of friction even before he was officially a Brown.
Ah, okay. Yeah, the piece talks about this history where, from its point of view, Cabot and Grossi are seen as kind of gatekeepers in that Cleveland sports world. And when someone new and high profile comes in, maybe someone who doesn't quite fit the usual mold or challenges the way things are normally done, well, that can cause some waves.
The analysis points to specific things like reports that Tony Grossi was questioning on his radio show even before the draft whether the Browns were really interested in Shedeur.
Okay.
It mentions him calling Shedeur Deion's kid more than an NFL prospect,
Yeah.
maybe implying the draft type was, cooked up by the media, not based on pure potential.
And Mary Kay Cabot, the material says, also voiced some doubts beforehand. The piece brings up her questioning if he had the toughness to thrive in a market like Cleveland.
Right.
It highlights her comment about his time at Jackson State being insulated, which the source pushes back on, saying, well, that kind of ignores how he performed under a massive spotlight at Colorado later on.
So this raises the question, which the source definitely asks. Did these comments before the draft kind of set a negative tone? Did it color the reception once he actually landed in Cleveland?
Yeah.
The analysis argues pretty strongly that, quote, by the time Shedeur was drafted, the tone had been set. It wasn't just skepticism. It was disdain disguised as concern.
Wow, that's a direct quote.
Yeah.
And the source really emphasizes how this underlying tension, this perceived friction, it boiled over really publicly almost right away, especially in press conferences.
Yeah, it recalls one specific moment, an early presser, pretty notable, where Mary Kay asked Shedeur how he planned to handle the, quote, pressure of being a Sanders in a blue-collar city.
Okay, I remember seeing clips of this.
Yeah.
And his response, which the source quotes directly, was definitely confident, very direct. Pressure is when you're not prepared. I'm built for this.
Right, a line that, plays great on national TV. But the source argues it rubbed local media the wrong way. It specifically mentions a report that Cabot visibly reacted with an eye roll. And then later, Tony Grossi apparently commented on air something like, this isn't Hollywood, basically telling Shedeur to just play ball and stop with the quotes.
So the analysis we're looking at, it reads that whole exchange not just as, routine media questioning a rookie, but as that cultural clash playing out right there.
Exactly.
From this perspective, it's like the media folks expected maybe some humility, some deference, and Shedeur gave them pure confidence, almost dominance. It felt, according to the source, like a real mismatch rooted in these different ideas about how a young star should carry himself.
But the analysis doesn't just stop at culture clash. It digs deeper. It suggests there's possibly another layer here, a really significant one to think about. Race, and how race might be playing into how things are perceived in sports media.
Right. This is where the source gets into some potentially sensitive territory, but it says very clearly that it feels it would be irresponsible not to acknowledge race as a possible factor in this whole dynamic.
The piece basically puts forward the idea that Shedeur's specific package being a, quote, confident, well-dressed, highly articulate young black man who's not afraid to speak his mind, reference his worth, and challenge traditions might, for some people, maybe in more traditional setups, feel like a threat.
A threat to the established way of things. And the analysis connects this to criticism other prominent black quarterbacks have faced. It names Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson, even Deshaun Watson earlier in his career.
Yeah.
Suggesting this whole situation taps into these sort of unwritten rules about who gets to lead, especially in that QB position, and how they're allowed to lead.
And it makes a really specific comparison. It looks at how Shedeur gets critiqued for maybe a lack of humility or for focusing on brand building, and it contrasts that with Baker Mayfield.
Ah, interesting.
The piece describes Mayfield as being, famously brash and media ready right from the start, doing national ads, being very outspoken. Yet the source argues he didn't face the same kind or intensity of criticism specifically about his confidence or brand focus.
So the analysis we're exploring here presents that as potentially showing a different standard being applied, suggesting maybe some of the friction comes from discomfort with who this confident, brand-savvy person is and how he's using his platform.
Right.
And again, it's really important for us to stress we're relaying the perspective presented in the source material on this complex issue, just laying it out neutrally.
Absolutely. But what really jumps out, especially when you look at the whole picture the source paints, is the huge difference between this media reaction it describes and, well, the fan reaction.
Oh, totally. Despite all this media attention, the source details, it makes one thing crystal clear. The fans love Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah.
The piece points to all the evidence jersey sales through the roof, huge social media buzz, those training camp clips getting millions of views. It argues the fans have totally embraced his confidence, his swagger. They see it as maybe heralding a new winning era for the Browns.
And the analysis notes how fans actually push back directly against some of the media criticism. It mentions fans jumping into comment sections when, say, Cabot called drafting him a gamble, or countering Grossi's questions about his leadership by posting stats and game film online.
Which then leads the source to ask a much bigger question, one that's relevant way beyond Cleveland. Are the media out of touch?
Yeah, interesting question.
It connects this fan reaction to the whole rise of independent media,
Yeah.
YouTubers, podcasters, analysts on social media, suggesting fans now have tons of ways to get their info and form their own opinions, completely bypassing the traditional gatekeepers that the piece identifies.
Right. It's reflecting that whole shift where fans can connect more directly with athletes now, cutting out the middleman, which the source suggests maybe lessens the impact or changes the perspective of those established media voices.
Okay, so given all this friction, all these dynamics, where does the material see things going? It talks about a path forward.
Yeah, and the analysis is pretty practical, actually. It basically says, look, Shedeur probably doesn't need the approval of who the source calls Cleveland media royalty. But it does acknowledge that having some kind of working relationship would help as the season goes on.
Because let's face it, the pressure's going to ramp up, there'll be losses, mistakes will happen, and the media's job is to cover all of that.
For sure.
The source suggests that Shedeur's best bet is just to continue to lead with performance. That ultimately, playing well will drown out a lot of the outside noise.
The piece also puts a fair bit of responsibility on the Browns organization itself.
Okay.
It argues they need to protect him not just with the O-line on the field, but with support from the top down. That means their PR approach, maybe providing mentors, helping him handle everything off the field. If the team builds that supportive bubble, the source thinks he's got the tools to handle the press storms.
And then finally, in this part, the source kind of expresses a hope. Maybe these specific media figures, maybe legacy sports media more broadly, can
Evolve. Evolve? How so?
evolve to see that, confidence isn't automatically arrogance, that swagger isn't inherently bad, and that authenticity, even if it looks different from what they're used to, is actually valuable, both in a player and, for the city of Cleveland.
Okay, so if we pull back from the day-to-day stuff, what's the bigger takeaway here according to this analysis?
Well, the source sums up its main point by framing Shedeur Sanders as something much bigger than just the Browns' potential answer at quarterback. It calls him a symbol of cultural shift.
Symbol? How? A symbol of what exactly?
A symbol, it argues, of how modern athletes are taking charge of their own stories, their own brands. A symbol of Black leadership stepping confidently into the league's most watched position. And just overall a symbol of unapologetic excellence.
Unapologetic excellence, okay.
And the source basically concludes that this very presence, this whole unapologetic approach, it just makes some people uncomfortable, especially, it suggests, within what it terms legacy media.
And the piece ends on a really strong note, doesn't it?
It does. The final line quoted is pretty definitive. Shedeur Sanders isn't here to fit in. He's here to win. And the implication, the source adds, is clear. Cleveland better get used to it. Wow. Yeah, that definitely leaves you thinking. It frames this whole thing as way more than just typical sports reporting or a player media stat.
Absolutely. You're presenting it as this collision, right? Different generations, different media cultures, maybe even deeper societal views, all crashing together under the very bright lights of the NFL spotlight.
It certainly gives you a lot to chew on, thinking about how sports, media, and the way we see athletes are all changing.
It really does. And it leaves us, and you listening, with this final thought to mull over, kind of building on everything we've discussed from this source. How should sports media adapt? Adapt to this new era of athletes who are so adept at controlling their own brands, their own narratives? And what role should those older cultural or generational expectations even play, or maybe not play, in how sports are covered moving forward? Something definitely worth thinking about as you watch how this all unfolds.